Shawn Berry, what is a rites of passage?
A rite of passage is a ritual death and rebirth where one passes out of one identity that they see themselves and births into a new identity. And to make it a complete rite of passage, that requires a community that is supporting them as they transform from one identity to the other.
Okay. And tell me, where did you get started?
Yeah, well, I first went out in 1998. And I'd just turned 30, and I had a newer friend who had done a vision quest. And this is out in Los Angeles area. And I'd heard about vision quests, just from books or like stories about Native Americans and stuff. And it never occurred to me that that was the thing that was still going on. So when someone told me that they had done a vision quest, I was like, what? And I was like, really intrigued. And he introduced me to the man who ultimately took me out. His name was Kent Pierce. So yeah, so that's kind of how it came into my, my path as something I wanted to do.
How have you seen the evolution since when you started into what it is now, 2026, 30 years?
Yeah, yeah. Well, in a traditional wilderness rite of passage, there are three components. The words, sometimes you'll hear the words said differently, but essentially it's severance is the first phase, threshold is the second phase, and incorporation is the third phase. And severance is really, at least for modern people who don't really come from an intact culture where they already have somewhat of an identity, severance, a lot of that is doing an inventory and understanding who you are right now. Who am I right now? And what are all the experiences and philosophies and relationships that have made me who I've become. Then the threshold part is going out to do an ordeal, right? That's in this tradition, it's doing a 4-day, 4-night solo fast in the middle of fucking nowhere.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, by yourself. Within that time, that threshold time, there's a ceremony where you perform a ritual death. And when you come back out of that process, that is the rebirthing moment, stepping back across the threshold. And then incorporation, the third part is, as far as this lineage is concerned, it's always been said that incorporation is the third and most difficult part. And 30 years on, I can tell you that that is true. And a lot of organizations that do this kind of work, it's really hard to provide incorporation support, which is basically coming back as a new person and inserting yourself back into the old world you just came from. Right. So it can be really hard. There's everything and everyone's just expecting you to come back and return to the way it was. But you're basically a gear that's been retoothed. So it just makes the machine clunky. And it can be really disruptive to a lifestyle, to relationships. Needing to have community and people behind you who are rooting for that new person to live out that new life is essential. And a lot of organizations struggle with how to provide that kind of incorporation support. And the organization I came through, Condor Clan, was the first organization, in that realm of organizations that really took that on. And Rising Man, which I now help, guide through, has also taken it on and gone one step further with really trying to bring, real support and real connection and community and culture to the men who have gone through and initiated a little bit into through a rite of passage into their full, the new identity, whatever that may be.
Do you feel supported in this incorporation process when you were back in Condor Clan?
Yeah, I did. That was one of my favorite things. I mean, going through severance was cool because I was with a small group of guys. And the threshold, of course, was powerful and amazing to be out in nature like that. But something I really loved about coming back was how alive that community was. And there's all these men and women who had gone out before me. And there was just energy with people. We all had a common thing to connect over, this time on the mountain, so to speak, during the threshold. So it became like this reference point of like, where we all, connected at. And then always speaking to like, how is incorporation going since then? And a lot of the activities we did were based on just giving space to speak about that and support each other and the challenges and successes, and also just creating opportunity for people just to get surface area and to feel like there was real community behind it, not just a program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And many programs fail in even men's works programs fail to have this incorporation phase and keep talking about it and just keep the community together. Like I struggle a lot into like just going back and talking with the people that I even fasted. But how can someone really tap into this process of community? What's been your experience? Like, what did you do to keep yourself accountable to the community?
Well, in this day and age of modernity, the biggest challenge is that no one really needs community to live our lives compared to, say, our ancient ancestors, where you really could not go it alone. Like you had to participate and partake and compromise, but also there was a lot of reward and privilege, for achievements in those communities as well. That made it worth it, to put in, to be of service and to reap the benefits of that, of being part of a group that was doing something together. In this day and age, because no one has to do that, a lot of it is, at least in my experience. Well, I'll give you an example. So I've been living in Boulder, Utah, some really small town. There's only like 250 people there. And within a month, I kind of knew most people. I'd met probably half the town, or recognized half the town. Okay. Driving around the little roads and stuff, you start to recognize everybody's car. Right. And there is a sheriff in town who lives there, but he's sheriff for the whole county. So he's really only ever in Boulder like one day of the week. And even then, it's just for a few hours.
Yeah.
So if something goes down in that town, it's like it's up to you and your neighbors to figure it out. There's no cops that are going to come rescue you in a situation.
Okay.
So, and with the driving thing, it's like if you're driving like an idiot, everybody knows who it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you can't escape that. There's nowhere to hide out. And you can't just do what you want and let everyone else absorb the consequences. And so I feel like for me, that is one thing that I really like about choosing to build community, because I feel like when you really make real connections with people, it's the relationships that kind of guide your conscience about how you're making choices in the world. And particularly communities like that, where the core of the community is based around integrity and vulnerability and accountability. It's really hard to participate in a community like that and then go outside that community and live some other life.
Yeah.
Being an idiot. It's like it really does kind of draw you in and bleeds over into the rest, at least into my rest of my life. Like I wanted to be that in all my ways out in the communities, not just that one.
Totally. It like keeps you sharp and you cannot hide, as you just said, right?
Yeah. And people know, when you come out of this process, when you rebirth into that new identity in a community like that, everyone knows that new identity. Everybody sees that inspiration and just like it's excitement about in that person, in myself, to like, I want to like be this guy and I can do these things and I want to be seen for that. And I want to bring that and share that. In those communities, everybody's like, okay, great. We're looking for that. If you are not doing that, there's going to be some loving questions about, seems like you're not doing the thing, what's going on? And a really gentle and loving calling forward that keeps this. It's really helped me stay aligned to my purpose and, not get lost in side quests or whatever. And so super helpful.
Now, when did you do the transition between like I participate as a participant, I do the walk, I now say I'm claiming this is the new identity, into now being a guide that helps other people? So when was that transition?
You mean getting into guiding?
Yeah.
It happened pretty quick. I went out in 1998 in Kent. It was only the 4th or 5th year that he had started taking people out, and word was kind of getting out. So he was only doing one group a year, and he was getting enough requests to do 2 groups a year and wanted a second guide. And we just really connected. So it was pretty quickly, about 4 or 5 months after I did my rite of passage, where he asked me if I wanted to train with.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so I trained for 2 years, whereas it was just me and him, but he would be leading everything. And then he would kind of explain parts to me or ask me to hold certain parts and just make sure it went well or fill in the gap. And, over time, he would just give me more and more leadership position in the process. Yeah. So it was 2002 when I was like a full-fledged, I was leading groups by myself. So, yeah.
So what's the most rewarding thing for you?
The most, oh my gosh, there's so many rewarding things. I mean, honestly, when I first did the process, I remember how powerful it was for me. But also it's not in my nature to shout it from the mountaintop, So I was very, I don't like to proselytize or convince people that this is the thing for them. I just like to be in touch with my process. And so for a long time, I was very, I don't know if I'd say shy, but I wouldn't really come out all the time and say like, you got to do the rite of passage, man. It's amazing. You're going to I didn't feel that drive to do that. And because I didn't know if it was true for everybody. People move around in spiritual communities all the time where they're in this thread and they're all in, but then 10 years later, like, yeah, it's not working for me, and they move on. And I didn't want to feel like I was misleading anyone. So it really took until I was, I don't know, well into my 40s, like 20 years in, before I really started to get the data on my own life over 20 years of seeing how much it was this staying piece of my life and becoming the centerpiece of my life about living an initiatory lifestyle. You know, what did that look like? What did that mean? And seeing how it was ultimately the thing that was guiding my life, that I started to feel more confident about sharing it with people more directly and feeling more convicted that, yeah, this is something everybody needs to do, you know?
Is that something you believe now?
I do. You know, it's interesting because tribal communities, and if you go back about between 30 and 50,000 years ago is when we kind of were in the height of tribal, early tribal ancestry, and when, more sophisticated ceremonial ritual practices started to come forward, and the rite of passage, the initiatory elements in tribal life was in all of our ancestry. They go back to a tribal people who are doing sophisticated, land ceremonies. And you think about how well we were able to sustain a equilibrium with how we lived our lives on the planet. And then you cut up to like 2 or 3,000 years into the agricultural revolution. About 10, it's about 12,000 years ago, agricultural revolution starts. 2 or 3,000 years into that is when you start to really see the tribal lifestyle start to like break apart. We started moving into more city-state type stuff, and rites of passages that were coming from a people who lived in a place were starting to get dispersed and spun out. Just for whatever reason, there's a lot of city-states invading territories and taking over territories, and then there's famines and diseases and all this stuff, right? But it just started to fall off, and cut forward to today, where most people don't really know what a rite of passage is, nor are they part of a community that could even support them doing that, that would, be able to hold that space for them. And then you look at what we're doing to the planet. It's just like, I think there's a link there, because I do believe like when you go out to do that practice for the first time, when you go out to do your rite of passage in the wilderness for the first time, a lot of it, I believe, is that you are re-imprinting on the earth off of humans. Like where we grow up around humans, where from the day we're born, we imprint on humans. And not so much on the earth and where all our stuff comes from.
Yeah.
And I think tribal communities were sort of getting hip to that, of like, as they progressed and evolved and got more technology, I think there's a sense of like, well, we still need to have an earth-based connection. There was this, somehow they understood that was an important piece. Now that we've lost that entirely, I just feel like it just seems to be a diminishing value for protecting the planet and its resources. And you look at where we are now, and it's like, oh, I wonder why.
Yeah.
So
It's because we become estranged to the land.
yes.
So we become desensitized to the land.
100%. Like if you had a relationship with nature and the land the way that you did with your mother or your father or your baby daughter, I mean, we would live our lives much, much differently,
So it starts first at that root of like connection with nature. Then it's connection even to self, right? Because you start doing the inventory of who you actually are. Is it always the case that someone ends up discovering something different about themselves?
Yeah, for sure. Again, in a culture where you've been watched from a child, and the community has raised you, and the community is in on the same standards of how to live. When you come to that first rite of passage, when you're initiating out of adolescent mind into adult mind, sure, there's some revelations that come, but in general, you kind of know who you are already because you've been seen and you've been told your place and position as a child. And because you've been tracked by your aunties and uncles and elders, they already kind of know where you're going to fit in best as an adult. So there's just a lot of, there's way less wondering about who you're going to be and what you're going to do with your life. But within that guidance towards the best place for you, there's obviously opportunity for individual expression and all that comes with, you're having your own personal identity. Today is like, there's a lot of men who come through this who, like in this day and age, you can be anything. You can literally be anything.
Yeah.
How do you choose? What's your criteria? What are your standards, how to live your life? ethically, and then choose your path from there. Like, it's so hard. And I feel like a big part of this process we do is really just trying to get underneath all the messaging of society of like, you can be this, you should do it this way. This is the standard of success. Like there's all these external messages about how you should achieve life, right? And trying to peel all that back and really just get down to the root of a person and just say, but what do you want? Forget all that stuff. Let's just say it doesn't matter. If all that stuff didn't matter, how would you live your life? What's your heart's bliss? All that stuff we've heard in lots of spiritual practices, but we hear it so much it's almost like colloquial at this point. It doesn't really penetrate like the meaning of it. So really getting into giving someone an opportunity to really say, this is my heart's bliss and this is the life I want to lead, and say, I support you in that. We want to see you do that. I mean, who gets that opportunity, So that's what I feel like is really powerful is this to see men just really make contact with their true selves, their authentic selves, and to see a light go on and to give them permission that it's okay to live the life as that authentic person instead of trying to conform into all these nooks and crannies out there in the world to, financially set yourself up, because that's ultimately the game out there, which, I mean, you have to.
But after that, who are you?
Right. Well, it's looking at like, it's more about negotiating how you do that more than compromising. Right. So I feel like if you're just trying to get the money to feel safe and secure and make an impression, you're going to make a lot of compromises. If you want to maintain your authenticity, then you can negotiate for the money. Right. So I think it's an important distinction.
So what is your individual definition of what success looks like?
For me, I think I would say at this point, it's, well, we have, and when you come out of this process, you get a mantra, right? And you come up with a mantra, sort of like this quick, easy to remember and easy to say guide that always reminds you about how to make choices. We call it the power statement in Rising Man. So mine, I'm a wholehearted, confident, joyful man made of earth whose creativity, listening, intuition, and curiosity are gifts for his people, right? So for me, I want to experience myself as a wholehearted, joyful, confident man. Those are things I always felt like hard to get to, so I claim them because I want to be that kind of man. I want to experience myself that way. And I want anyone who comes in contact with me to experience me in that way on some level. So that's success. If I'm feeling that way every day and if people are experiencing me every day that way, then I'm like success. But the key is I know that the way that man shows up, the wholehearted, joyful, confident man shows up, is if I'm in my creativity, if I'm in my listening, if I'm in my intuition, if I'm being curious. So every day I'm trying to find ways to put myself in, to look for such circumstances and situations where I compel myself to be in one of those aspects. Because when I am, then the confidence and the wholeheartedness and the joy starts to come up. So that success for me is like, am I doing that every day? Am I looking for those opportunities and saying yes to them, even though they're risky and hard and scary? Because every time I say yes, I always experience that, the manifestation of that wholehearted, joyful man. So,
love it. How can someone get started in a rites of passage process? Like, how can they get involved?
Well, I would say people who are desperate are not looking for ways to make their life more difficult, right? So, if someone's listening to this and they're feeling this like, oh, kind of spark of interest or intrigue, it's probably because your life's going pretty well, right? Things are covered. And you're looking for a little bit of, something to, adventure yourself a little bit. So I would say that's the first thing. If you're listening to something like this and you're feeling a twinge of intrigue, that's a good sign, because it basically means that whoever you've been, the identity that you have seen yourself in, and that identity who's been making the choices and using the philosophies to navigate their life to get to where you are, is coming to an end.
Yeah.
It's like the first stage of a rocket, right?
Mm.
It gets you into orbit and then it's out of fuel and it's got to be jettisoned or it's going to slow the rocket down. So life's similar in that way, where we go through stages and we have these ideas and strategies and philosophies and the relationships and all these things that we're just kind of acting on to get us to a place where, wanting to be in some way. And then we kind of get in the realm of that place. We never get close to it even, right? So either we get to it or we just never get to it.
Yeah.
Either way, we come to a place where it's time to reinvent oneself. Like, now what? Now that I have achieved this, or now that I'm clear that I'm never going to achieve this, how will I reconcile the truth of my reality compared to something being a dream or an idea? So it is that sort of open space of wondering of like, what next? Where do I go now? It's similar to like when you're in a relationship with a woman and they say to you, so what are we doing?
So what are we?
Yeah. So what are we, And then it's time to sit down and be like, okay, well, the dating phase is over apparently. Now it's relationship phase. And the person who I am as it's someone who dates cannot be in a relationship.
Yep.
So I have to shed some skin, make some choices, realign my priorities, and there's a new self that's going to emerge that's actually capable of relationship and is no longer doesn't have a priority of dating, right? So it's really just coming to that space of realizing that whatever you've done to get to where you are, it's starting to feel a little bit plateauing in some ways. So to get started, I mean, I think that's the first thing to get started is if there's an intrigue, then it's already begun. And the next step is then to find, there's tons of organizations. You can go to a website called wildernessguidescouncil.org.
Mm-hmm.
And you can search by region to find organizations who offer rites of passages. And you really do, it needs to be facilitated.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you can have a transformational experience by yourself, but you can't have a rite of passage without community because it requires being seen by others. So there's an important aspect of community there. That would be the first thing, is just starting to look for an organization that you can get involved with who would offer that kind of programming or ceremony.
How safe is doing a rites of passage? Because someone hears fast 4 days, 4 nights, they're like, am I gonna die? Like, how safe is it?
It's safe.
Your experience?
Yeah. All of our ancestors, the whole 3 days a meal, 3 meals a day, every day is a pretty new thing for humans. Most of our ancestors, almost 2 billion people in the world, I'm pretty sure that's the fact I read, a day have less than 3 meals a day, right? And the body's very adept at working with or without calories. When we have plenty, we work off of glucose. When we don't have any, we work off of ketones. So we have a bi-fuel body, and the body can go, there's that kind of 5-5-5 thing. You can go 5 weeks without food, 5 days without water, 5 minutes without air. Right. So 4 days is not that much. It's scary, and it's definitely your body. If you've never fasted before, your body's going to definitely be like, what? What are we doing right now? But it's not necessarily, the fasting isn't necessarily dangerous. And in fact, there's a lot of health aspects that come with fasting, which people have probably heard about. So the bigger component is fasting in the wilderness alone, right? So all these organizations do have a base camp where there are always people who are in base camp that you can reach from your spot. They know where you are, but you're out there at your spot by yourself. And a lot of that's just being safe in the wilderness, Most organizations offer just basic first aid and logistics around how to treat yourself. There's almost all of them involve drinking water. Is it dangerous? Only if you don't follow the protocols you've been given here. But there is that edge of like, it doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Like today, we're probably in the lowest day of the hottest day in this journey, when people are fasting out there, right?
yeah, we got 5 guys out there right now, and it's been in the high 90s. And I think the first day and yesterday we didn't have a thermometer out here, but it had to be like breaking 100 over there. I was genuinely concerned. We're in the desert, we're in canyon country, so there's plenty of places to find shade, but sometimes even the shade is hot. And these guys are working on, by day 3, you're definitely about out of glucose. So your body's, now converting your fat to ketones, and there's a lag with that in your body. You don't have like just burst of energy. Your body has to kind of spin up. So moving around, lethargy, lightheadedness, nausea sometimes can come in. And so that can complicate things when you're exposed. But again, like we also have a safety check system where everybody can they're getting checked in on at least once a day without having verbal or visual contact. So we trust that process. And the rest is in God's hands. I always say that as a guide, we're here to give you wisdom and knowledge through severance to help you get clear on why you want to do this. And we're here to provide wisdom and knowledge and support when you incorporate back into your life. But when you do the threshold, you're out there by yourself. Nature's the teacher, not me. And that's really what counts, because it really is coming into contact with your own, I would say that the purest form of unnamed higher self. Even higher self has a idea to it, but there's a part of us that we don't really come in contact with often because we're not required to. We don't have to in our convenient worlds.
Yep, 100%. Now, shifting more into your creative pursuit and also your experience, you've compiled 20 years, 30 years of knowledge into a body of work. So could you share a little bit more?
Yeah. So I'm working on a book. It's called The Thread That Pulls on All Things. And it's really the main question is asking is why do humans do rites of passages? And so it's got a little bit of anthropology in there. It's got a little bit of mythology, a little bit of philosophy. But what I find really interesting is that if you go by the science, anyways, Homo sapiens as a species has been walking around for 350,000 years or more. Even some say 500,000. So that's me and you, same brain size, same skeletal structure, but so far, there isn't any sign of any kind of ritual behavior at all until about 70,000 years ago.
Okay.
And that's when you first start finding bodies that may have been buried with intention. Sometimes there's trinkets with them, but that's kind of it, right? And then, as I said earlier, once you get into like 30 to 40,000 years ago, you start to see signs of actual tribal activity where there's communication, symbology, ritual, ceremony, right? So, the first 300 some thousand years, we didn't occur to us that we should be doing rites of passages, whatever that is, right? And then somewhere around 30,000 years ago, we're like, you know what, actually, we need to start doing this thing. We don't know why. We don't know what it's supposed to be, but we're being compelled because I don't think our ancestors were sitting around in all their leisure time just thinking of ways to be more spiritual. Right? So what's the way it happens? I mean, these are ancestors who probably didn't have a lot of sophisticated language even, but just in our own evolution of consciousness and socialness and technology, some kind of perfect storm was arising where like the whole idea of rites of passages evolved or just, came up. It just happened. And then we did it for tens of thousands of years. And then we've kind of fallen off again. So the book is really just exploring, like, what about that? And not so much from the scientific point of it, because there's no record of our thoughts and feelings and ideas. So I kind of coined a new term called experiential anthropology, where the book is really just trying to get inside the experience, like what it had been like
Yeah.
if you were one of your ancient ancestors and just there was just something coming up and it just could not name it or couldn't really know how to talk about it, but we just had to start doing things and
Yeah.
how would we start doing them and what would we have made it mean, you know, over generations. This wasn't something that would have happened within a generation or two, it's could have been, I don't know, 50 generations that this was coming forward. And how do you pass it on when you don't even really have rich articulate language or writing? But it did. It just kept coming forward, coming forward, coming forward until we had this, this thing we call the rite of passage.
It's that thread, right? It's the thing that starts pulling you
Yeah.
and starts reaching to, okay, like let's actually start creating meaning out of this
Yeah.
versus just existing.
Right. Right. Somehow, I talk a lot in the book about, in our 250,000 years ago or more, we probably didn't have any language beyond what the great apes have or other like dolphins or, it is. We communicated, but it wasn't like we had adverbs and nouns and slang. So it was very rudimentary. And I don't think because we had to do so many things together, like we didn't even have control of fire at the time. And we could get fire if we had if we got near a forest fire or able to dip a stick into some lava or something, but we couldn't even make fire. So, and just the way we had to protect ourselves, we didn't have, we didn't know how to tan hides or make clothes.
Yeah.
So you just imagine about like, how would you stay warm at night? Or how would you hunt when you don't have, it was like maybe pointy sticks and rocks. So everything was being done as a group. It's literally like you were the group was like an organism. So I don't think there was a lot of differentiation between I am me and you are you. It's just you were another extension of me, but there's not even a me that I could recognize you as an extension of, right? It was just sort of this collective consciousness. I do think our technology played a big part in the individual consciousness kind of arriving, because once you can start making fire with two sticks, it's like somebody gets fired from a forest fire, brings it back to the camp, and we build a big bonfire, right? And someone snags a few deer, and we throw the deer in the fire, and we all get to eat well that night. And maybe we keep the fire going for a few days because it's warm and safe, but eventually, whatever burns out or rains out or something. And when we cook that deer, it's like, well, I don't really like burnt meat, but someone left the deer on the fire too long, so we're too bad. We're all eating burnt meat, right? And but once you can make fire by yourself,
Yeah.
cook my meat the way I want to cook it, and so the idea of preferences started to arise, and I think that led to differentiation of like, oh, I like my meat really cooked. You don't like your meat hardly cooked at all. We're different, and so it kind of begins on that level. So I feel that's something about the rite of passage that I think was trying to bridge the idea between honoring that we are individuals, but we still there's still a value and importance on being a collective, unified group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Awesome, man. Excited for your book.
Thanks.
Where can people find you or learn more from you?
Gosh, right now you can find it on Instagram, the thread that pulls on Instagram, and that I just have it mirrored on my Facebook too. So not by the same name. I had a website, but I failed to pay my rollover fee and I forgot and it got taken down. And because I'm trying to finish the book right now, I just refuse to take time to do all this stuff right now. But yeah, if you're on Instagram and tag me there, I'm happy to connect with anyone.
Amazing. One final message to someone that's probably curious about this or is on the edge. What would you say to him?
I would say that whatever truth about who you know yourself to be that is really clamoring to get out and to be seen, it's worth the risk to take it. And I believe the best way to take that risk is by doing a rite of passage.
Shawn, thank you for supporting me on the compass and supporting so many men.
Thanks, Astro. It's great to sit here and have a good conversation. Thanks, brother.